to Kaleidoscope. I'm Jane Penwell, and if you've been watching the show, you know that there is no longer an Ann Michael. However, if you haven't, let me tell you that Nan Michael is no longer associating herself with Kaleidoscope. She has retired from Kaleidoscope. So it's just me. Sorry about that. But today you will see a nice interview, me with somebody else, and maybe you'll enjoy that. This is the Halloween program, and I realize you're seeing this after Halloween, and I'm sorry about that. But just to make things better, maybe, we're going to show a little bit of the Honey for the Heart puppet parade that happened Halloween night, 6 o'clock, in beautiful downtown Athens. These puppets were made by the people who are using them, who are controlling them. And it took weeks and weeks for them to make these puppets. It was a fabulous, fabulous sight. I really recommend next year, if you can, get downtown on Halloween night and see the puppet parade. That's 6 o'clock, you know, long before anything gets very crazy downtown. So you can, you can pretty much count on, you'll see some costumes, but if you want to take your kids and they would love it, don't worry, at 6 o'clock, I think you're safe, without a doubt. Okay, so we're going to show you a video, a 5-minute or so video of this parade. Sadly, in 2014 instead of 2015, the 2015 video isn't up yet. But you can go to YouTube if you're fascinated by this and you're really interested in it. You can go to YouTube probably next week. They'll have the 2015 one up. There's not that much difference between the puppets, and of course they're all made the same way. So you'll see this Honey for the Heart organization putting the puppets together, and you'll hear from some of the people who did it, and then you'll see some of the puppets and some of the parade. I hope you enjoy it.
The second annual Honey for the Heart Halloween Parade is about to begin.
What is this? What are we doing? We are camped out in a dedicated space for 3 weeks with the ambition of making giant puppets and a spectacle of joy that illustrates the spirit of Athens.
This is the place in Ohio where people, oh yeah, the funky people, they live in Athens. So let's do it. Let's celebrate it.
That's pretty Athens, I gotta say. Pretty Athens.
This larger-than-life giant puppet form came from Europe. A German man named Peter Schumann came to America in 1961, and he brought this puppet form with. When the resistance against the Vietnam War grew in the 60s, he created these 4-block-long giant puppet protest parades that went through Manhattan, and no one had ever seen anything like it.
For a small town like this, it's just really, really exciting. It's really, really moving. Then you delve in deeper and you realize the magnitude of it. It's like a Macy's Day parade. You know, like what we put into this is what they put in New York into one of the huge holiday parades.
I don't know where to take it, really. How about we all walk it into that front room? No, it won't fit through the door.
The beautiful thing about making artwork for the art maker is the struggle and the investigation and the exploration. And when you take that bit away and say, we want, 14 things that look exactly like this, replicate this, it's a different adventure, and it's not as engaging.
We prefer people to just have this big pile of stuff and just say, build something. and let them swim in it a little bit, you know, and you'll see that discomfort coming up and stuff, but that's the creative edge that's coming out of people.
Stepping outside your box sometimes is a really wonderful expression and a feeling. Sometimes that happens. And if I try to explain it to them, it goes over the head. I've never seen anybody do that to a balloon. That was awesome. But if I let them discover it on their own first and they ask a question, then they're more receptive to the advice that I give them.
This is my first one that I've ever tried to accomplish and paint. So basically the box is this big, and then you push this in by stapling your box. And then I just added a piece of cardboard for the nose, cut the hair out of felt in little layers and just shaped it as I glued them on. Made some hands out of balloons, and then I just paper mache'd over those and hopefully come back next year. Making plans already.
Physical evidence of the spirit of Athens is right in this room. And we feel it, we know it, we talk about it, and it's really great to see it.
I know that word community is really tossed around, but I see it in this. People, connections and bridges are made that wouldn't happen otherwise.
Oh, 100. Oh, my gosh, that was so awesome. I love that video.
I just think it's something innately in us to transfer ourselves into that world of fantasy because it's whimsical, it's playful, it's happy, it's joyful. And, you know, God knows we need that in our culture bad. We really do.
It's a necessity for living, and it nourishes your heart and your mind and your soul.
But once you have that sculpture or that piece, that puppet moving, then it comes alive. Then the imagination can kick into it.
It's awesome. It's hard to explain how excited I am to finally see her come to life. And she's so big, and to me, she's perfect. So.
Wow. Athens. Crazy. It's unbelievable. What fun. So much smiles and all these people. Wow, this is way bigger than last year. I love it. I can't kind of take it all in still. We have fun.
Yay!
I love a good day at the office, I have to say.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that parade, and you could see, once you saw it, how much kids would enjoy it. And I don't know if you noticed, there was somebody with a Santa hat on. I was really surprised at the people downtown with Santa outfits on as their Halloween costume. But, you know, when you think about it, it's a pretty good idea because you're completely covered. And it was kind of drizzly and yucky. And sometimes it's cold, so I guess that makes sense. But I was still surprised. Okay, now we're going to get down to the real business of Halloween. I shouldn't really say that because Halloween is not real, but anyway, I was doing a lot of research on what kinds of strange events have happened in Athens, Ohio over the years. And later on, you're going to see an interview of somebody talking about the Ridges, not to talk about anything paranormal at the Ridges, but to explain why the Ridges does not have paranormal activity, but giving you a lot of information about the Ridges. So that's really interesting. So then I thought, well, what else has happened here? And I just stumbled across a website called Prairie Ghosts. And I thought, oh, you know, I'm not a big believer in ghosts, which if you've seen this program, you already know that. But I started reading, and lo and behold, I came across a fascinating story about spiritualism in Athens, Ohio. So I apologize for having to read it, but I couldn't memorize it, that's for sure. And so I'm going to read a couple of pages from the information given on the website of Prairie Ghosts regarding Mount Nebo here in Athens County. I hope you enjoy this. During the heyday of spiritualism, home circles were all the rage among those who were fascinated by the mysterious workings of the spirit world. And maybe some of you might know or have heard before Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, all the Sherlock Holmes stories. And if you've been watching this program, you know I've been a Sherlock Holmes avid reader since I was 10. Got into this too in the late 1890s. So this spiritualism was kind of swept across the world at this particular time. So people who were fascinated by the mysterious workings of the spirit world, in these small, close-knit groups of family and friends, members would gather around the dining room table and, curious about tales of rapping from elsewhere, they would try to see if they too could receive communications from the spirits. Quite often they did. They might hear a soft tap followed by a louder one, and soon deafening noises that could be heard all over the house. Questions would be asked, codes devised, and soon information would be flowing from the other side. In many cases, especially with socially prominent families, such manifestations would be kept private in order to save themselves from ridicule. However, in other cases, when social standing was not a concern, spirit contacts would be widely publicized and neighbors would be called in for free performances. A family about whom very little is known was the Coons family of Athens County, Ohio. Though they did not gain much material profit from their venture, the spirit room that they built in Athens County became, for a short time in the 1850s, a spiritualist destination that attracted hundreds of believers from all over the county. What was nearly as amazing as the fact that so many people came to Athens County was the ordeal that they had to go through to get there. Although still somewhat remote today, we don't think so, do we? It was a virtual wilderness in the 1850s. It was located in a rough and hilly area not far from the Virginia, now West Virginia line. To reach it, one had to travel by stagecoach from Columbus over rutted and often washed out roads. Then to reach the Coons cabin, visitors still had to walk another 2 miles along a wooded trail. However, few pilgrims regretted their journey, and most felt completely rewarded by the manifestations that awaited them. Jonathan Coons, the head of the family, and his wife Abigail had 9 children. They were self-educated farmers, but well-versed in politics and the philosophy of the times. Early in 1852, Coons had come across newspaper descriptions of the Fox family rappings and had at once made a personal investigation of the growing spiritualist phenomenon. He attended several seances throughout Ohio and allegedly learned from the spirits that he was a gift medium. When he returned home, he also discovered that Abigail, his wife, and his oldest son Nahum were also endowed with psychic abilities. After holding a number of seances of their own, the Coons were ordered by spirits to build what was dubbed their spirit room, ordered by them. They were given the exact specifications on how to build it, the size, the furnishings, and the equipment to use. Coons immediately went to work and, following the spirit's instructions, constructed a log cabin that was 12 by 14 feet, had 3 shuttered windows, a single door, and a 7-foot-high ceiling. The room was then furnished with benches that would hold about 20 people. The spirits also requested that they equip the spirit room with a number of musical instruments, a tenor drum, a bass drum, 2 fiddles, a guitar, an accordion, a trumpet, a tin horn, a tea bell, a triangle, and a tambourine. I guess Coons wasn't a wealthy man. He had trouble getting all that stuff, but eventually he did. After another seance, the spirits then demanded 2 tables, a rack for the musical instruments, and wire with which to suspend a few small bells, and some images of doves that were cut from sheets of copper. After faithfully following all of these instructions, the Coons began giving public seances. The three of them, Coons himself, his wife, and his son, acted as mediums. And in the darkened cabin, the spirits began giving lengthy communications on various spiritual subjects, as well as concerts on the musical instruments. So they talked and they gave concerts. Neighbors from all over the region began descending on the spirit room in Mount Nebo, attracted not only by rumors about what was taking place there, but also because the racket made by the spirits could be heard for a mile in any direction. A mile. Imagine that was back before they had any kind of way to magnify noise like we have today. You couldn't turn up the volume back then. You could hear it a mile. So it must have been something. It was not long before visitors from other parts of the country began to arrive as well. Charles Partridge, a well-known New York publisher, later wrote that he found at least 50 people gathered for the first performance that he attended. Many of them were from various parts of Ohio, but there were representatives from other states too. Coons, on the advice of the spirits, gave preference to those coming from far away. There were no admission charges to attend the seances, but those who stayed the night at the Coons' home usually contributed some offering. So he wasn't making any money out of this at all. He wasn't even trying to make money out of it. While it may not have made money, it certainly attracted attention. Published accounts soon began to appear in journals and spiritualist newspapers, and from these reports it becomes quickly obvious that the seances were not for spectators with fragile nerves. The exhibition was often loud, and the spirits' performances on the musical instruments was usually ear-shattering. Well, yeah, if they could be heard for a mile. All of the reports, whether we choose to believe them or not, agree that in the total darkness of the crowded room, it would have been impossible for the Coons themselves to provide the deafening and boisterous entertainment. The program usually followed a set routine. After the audience was seated, the lights were turned out and the door and windows closed. The start of the seance was usually announced by the banging of the bass drum, which one witness compared to the firing of a cannon in close quarters. Then Coons, who sat at the table with his wife and son beside him, would start to play a lively tune on his fiddle. In moments, all of the other instruments would join in, keeping perfect time, though played with unseen hands. What is more astounding, the reports all stated, was that the instruments did not remain stationary, but would circle the room, playing wildly as they danced above the heads of the spectators. During one seance, Dr. G. Swan of Cincinnati wrote of a flying tambourine. One moment I would feel it on my head or brushing my hair, and the next it would be on the other side of the room. The triangle was also carried around the room and played in the same manner. Another witness, John Gage of Illinois, reported that the triangle dashed about over the heads of the visitors and was occasionally thrust into my face, said I was afraid it would hit me. So this was not for the faint of heart, obviously. According to another witness, the floating instruments would play in unison and were so loud that it made the whole house roar so as almost to deafen us. No one seemed to recognize any of the tunes that the instrument played, but they were melodies of some sort and not just noise. Charles Partridge stated that the instruments would start together and then stop abruptly as if by some signal. The music was sometimes accompanied by songs that were sung in what seemed to be something like human voices, but apparently not in English. Throughout all of this, the master of ceremonies was not Jonathan Coons, but rather a spectral voice that came through the tin horn. He called himself John King, and he proclaimed that he was the leader of the spirits present, which numbered 165 in all. He was said to be the spirit form of the Welsh buccaneer Henry Morgan, who died in 1688. King and his daughter Katie, who became most famous when attached to medium Florence Cook, became popular fixtures at the Coons seance. The musical part of the evening was followed by the appearance of spirit hands that were either luminous themselves or illuminated by phosphorized sheets of paper that were prepared by the Coons. Visible to a little above the wrist, the hands felt like real flesh, and according to witnesses, were sometimes either hot or cold. Dr. Swan, who requested that a hand be placed in his own, reported that it felt precisely like the hands of the subjects that I've handled in the dissecting room. Partridge, who also held out a hand and asked the spirits to take hold of it, said it gave a distinctive grasp when it touched his hand, but added it did not feel like the hand of a living person. Interesting. These phantom hands also played a part in the last feat of the evening, when the luminous appendages would write messages on pieces of paper. All those who described their visit to the spirit room saw the hands write out messages and at incredible speeds. Many of the witnesses watched the hands from a short distance, but one fascinated spectator pressed so close to watch that the hand playfully poked his nose with the end of a pencil. 6 witnesses from 4 different states testified that they watched the armless hand write with a pencil. It wrote very slowly, and so one witness asked it to write faster. At this request, the pencil began scrawling so rapidly across the paper that we could hardly see it go. So, explain that if you can. I don't know. A Mr. Pierce of Philadelphia was given an opportunity to examine the mysterious hand. He reported that it was human in all respects, even to the fingernails, but was slightly cooler than his own. Pierce then took out another sheet of paper and the spirit's pencil and began tracing an outline of the hand on the paper as far as the wrist, but found nothing any further than that point. The hand then shook hands with him and vanished. So you can imagine in the 1850s, this was pretty amazing. Hundreds of people came there. People saw this. They wrote this down. If you go to the Prairie Ghosts website, you can read about people who wrote accounts of being there. What really happened, we don't know. People say that this kind of spiritual stuff happened. But eventually, the Coons, they did this for 6 years. And then they gave up their medium performances and moved to Illinois and never did it again. They all died in different states and stuff. But they never ever had a spiritualist room or any experience after they left Athens County. So how interesting is that? You don't know what to think, whether or not there was any kind of, actual spirits. Maybe you read about poltergeists. Some people are associated with poltergeists. Now, whether that could have been, I don't know. But there's a lot of information on that Prairie Ghost website. The person who's in charge of that is really interested in this. And he is trying to do a lot of research and find out. So I'm going to keep following that website and reading, and if there's more information, I'll bring it to your attention. But the Mount Nebo site, you can look it up on the internet and see where it was. It's now private property, and you can't go up there. There's nothing there now anyway. The spirit room and the cabin that the Coonses lived in is gone. So, but you can see the site. Mount Nebo is still there. It's just not really a mountain, of course, a hill. So there you go. Strange things in Athens County, huh? Interesting, back in the 1850s. So that's kind of a Halloween bit of information for you. And next we're going to have an interview, as I told you, by someone who worked at the Ridges and who is here to talk about the Ridges and tell you a lot of information about it and maybe debunk some of the stuff that we've thought up until now. Well, hello, and welcome back to Athens Kaleidoscope. I'm here with my guest, George Eberts, who is going to be a very interesting person today to talk with us, because we're taping this, as you may already know, on the day before Halloween. But because this is Athens Kaleidoscope, we're not talking about crazy Halloween stuff. We're here to debunk that idea entirely. And George is here to tell us about the Ridges. Not the sensational stuff that everybody's heard about, in terms of the Ridges, but what it really is, what it really did, and kind of how it got to where it is today. And we're going to have some pictures of the ridges going by as George is talking. So welcome, George.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here. You're such a wealth of information
Well, I hope
about
so.
the ridges. Oh, I know so. I know. Don't worry. Don't take that modesty. Don't worry. So tell us in the beginning how you got involved with the ridges.
I first came up there in 1978 as a television studio engineer. There was a medical microwave television system, and it was distance learning and telemedicine before the internet was invented.
Wow, who knew?
Yeah, so I had started working in Columbus with the medical microwave program at Ohio State University Hospitals. Took a leave of absence for several months chasing an eclipse of the sun through Columbia and going down with my wife and a couple of friends, taking buses down to Bolivia and back. So I took the job of the medical microwave coordinator in Athens, moved here in '78, and been here ever since.
Never left, huh?
And I wasn't always at the Athens Mental Health Center, as it was known at the time. I started off at Oblenis with an office at Grover, or Grosvenor Hall, the College of Medicine. The College of Medicine was administrating the project. So I was officially employed by them. I realized I'd get a master's degree.
Oh, well.
For free, as an OU employee.
Well worth it, huh?
So before I did anything else in life, I'm going to stop and get me a free master's degree, and then we'll go on from there. And here I am still to this day.
No master's degree?
I did get a master's degree,
good.
yeah.
Okay.
I also ended up being, when the microwave television business, when the soft money ran out, and we all had to get real jobs, I got my boss's job, who was the staff education specialist at the Athens Mental Health Center.
I.e. the ridges.
And yeah, we were up at the ridges at the time. That's something I ought to mention, Jane. The common misperception is that they, sometime back, I don't know, maybe 60s, Reagan-era budget cuts in the 60s is what I'm told, although Reagan wasn't around till the 80s.
Right.
But, you know, in the mush of semi-historical quasi-memories that most people have, it was Reagan-era budget cuts, 1960s ethos have something to do with it, but they drugged everybody up, kicked them out, closed the place, and that was it. Actually, that is not true at all. We moved the patients and the staff. The entire clinical operation moved to a new building in 1993, and we're still there. Today we're called the Appalachian Behavioral Health Care, and it's one of 6 state psychiatric hospitals, what they call regional psychiatric hospitals in the state of Ohio. Some of the same patients are still there.
Well, that's good to know, because I think it's terrible to think that, and I think people do think that the poor souls were just, you know, put out on the street practically.
Deinstitutionalized, just kicked out, and no, that's not true.
One of my cousins who lived in Cambridge, and so I'm sure you know there's a Cambridge hospital.
Oh, yeah.
He ran several different like halfway houses type thing, you know, where people could go and be in the community, but they were still cared for. So I think there was more for the people maybe than we realize. But to get back to the buildings of the ridges, the actual structures that are there. So when you got there, all those buildings, of course, were still there because they were built back in the pretty much 1800s, right?
Yeah, there's only one building that's not still there, and that's the old tuberculosis hospital, which was destroyed over spring break in 2013. But when so all the buildings are still there, but when I started working in there in '79, it was the last year that all of the Kirkbride wings were still being used. And if you know how the Kirkbride building works, you have a big central building, which today is Lynn Hall, the Kennedy Museum. And then wings go out one side, both sides actually equally. That's very symmetrical. Wings go out to the side, then they drop back. They go out further, they drop back, and they go out one more time. You have 3 wings that converge in steps on the main building in the middle. So that's the Kirkbride design. And when I was there the very last year that all of the Kirkbride wings were still being used.
Wow.
And as I worked there the next couple of years, they began to abandon the Kirkbride building from the west end on over towards the middle. And they also abandoned several cottages that were being used at that point. The Kirkbride design of the building is true for many buildings from that era, from the mid to 1800s. The American asylum movement was very compassionate and progressive. It was getting people out of jails and poorhouses and basements and sheds and attics and circuses and other places where you might find mentally ill people living in wretched conditions, unable to pursue their own civil, legal, and human rights. So the idea of getting people on asylums was very positive. I think in the collective consciousness of consumers even today, that's a happy camper era. The idea that you work together as a part of a big extended family. It was like a family farm. And when you think about it, it's a time when we could do with and for mentally ill people what we did with and for each other. We all lived on big family farms back in those days.
Yeah.
And you raised what you ate, and you were a citizen of an extended family community. And it was the same for mentally ill people in asylum environments.
And just the word asylum, you know, the actual word asylum means a refuge.
It means safety for the people and respect for their work, just like political asylum does today.
Right. So those buildings were built after the Civil War, right?
Correct.
So maybe was there any intent to care for Civil War soldiers, perhaps?
That came with the territory. Every war leaves its psychic casualties, and the Civil War was no different. St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington is a place where even President Lincoln volunteered to help out with the patients there. And he dealt with a lot of what we would call post-traumatic stress disorder. In World War I, it was shell shock. In World War II, it was battle fatigue.
Yeah.
And there's always been people. So it wasn't built specifically for the Civil War veterans, but they were a big part of the mix of senile dementias and schizophrenia, or early onset schizophrenia and other kinds of mental illnesses. It was just part of the mix.
How did the bridges grow? Because there are quite a few buildings. What was the first building, the one where the Kennedy Art Museum is now?
Yeah, the first building was the Kirkbride building, where the Kennedy is, and the wings go out, drop back, go out, drop back, and go out again. That's what I refer to as the spine of the Kirkbride. All of that building was built at one time as a Kirkbride building with 6 total wings and one big giant core. So that was a building that was there, and there's early pictures of that building sitting there on a hill with nothing else around, including no trees. Because they cleared them all out when they were building the building.
So here's a diagram of the Kirkbride.
Right.
So what were those step backs, were those wards?
Yes.
Each one was its own ward?
Correct.
And then in the center was the administration?
Right.
Did the people who worked there live there?
Often. The superintendent and the chief doctor and the chief nurses and the matrons, other big shots of that era, they were expected to live there.
And so everybody was there together. So
workers could live there too. Even in my era, they were renting parts of the 4th floor in the central building. They were renting it to doctors.
So that kind of enhances your statement about a big family. Everybody was there together. So so there was that original, Kirkbride building, and then other stuff started to be built.
There were cottages built after Kirkbride finally died late in the 1880s, and I think of it as the industry getting out from under his thumb. The next thing after that was the cottage plan, and the cottage plan, as the name implies, puts fewer people in more buildings. And you have your buildings attractively arranged around a nice campus. And there's places in Ohio, in mental health, Massillon and Toledo, and in the developmental disabilities system, the Gallipolis are 3 examples of facilities that were just conceived and built during the cottage era. They don't have a Kirkbride central building.
I worked for 2 years at what they called the Boys Industrial School in Lancaster.
Yeah, I've heard it.
And actually, it was called Fairfield School for Boys when I worked there, but everybody knows it as BIS. And it was built on a cottage system. And there was a big, long road, kind of a U-shaped road, and then all the cottages were around there. And the central administration was in the middle. And really, that was wonderful for boys because they did have cottage parents. You know, it was really evolved to be like a little home for them. Was that the idea at the Ridges as well?
We have no way of knowing that. I think that it's always been a case of some patients live there, some staff work there. There was some room or countertop area, maybe in the lobby or the living room, whatever, would have been a nursing station. And I remember when I first started, not all of the cottages were still used, but cottages O and R were still used. And Faulkner Hall was still used. The big cottage up on the hill that we called Cottage L that had since become the Conacher Center, that was not still in use at that time. The TB hospital, parts of it were still in use. But they had nursing stations and nursing staff working there. And
so it was a little bit different of an idea. It wasn't cottage parents,
right,
so to speak.
and it may be that the clientele was different. It's difficult to differentiate. The further back in time, the less is differentiated between mental health and mental retardation.
True.
And they are, in fact, whole different trips. And we were mental health all along until about 1975, for about 10 years. It was the Athens Mental Health and Mental Retardation Center. Athens Mental Health and Developmental Center. And then the developmental part, when mental health split from mental retardation in about the mid-'80s, mental retardation took all of its patients away.
Yeah.
Or we kicked them out, probably.
Anyhow, they left.
Yeah, if you had a small MR unit like Athens, the mental health people kicked them out. If it was a small mental health unit like Tiffin, then mental health was kicked out. There was only one place in the state where an equal number of people, their administrations were roughly equal, and that was at Cambridge. Cambridge, right up till the mental health part closed in 2010, Cambridge had been, it was 2008, excuse me. But up until that time, Cambridge had been joint mental health and mental retardation. It was the last place in the state like that.
Wow. So looking at the Ridges now, how do you think it got this reputation it has of being this spooky place or scary place?
Well, unfortunately, I think part of it has to do with the stigma of mental illness. And I've often thought that it's another way in which mentally ill people are stigmatized, thought of as haunted, cursed, and damned instead of physically ill. An organ in your body isn't working that well. So part of it may be that. Part of it may be the idea that after we left there in '93, it was completely vacant for a couple of years. And a completely vacant building, if it's an old schoolhouse or a warehouse, might become known as haunted because people's imaginations go to work and the big old building sits there in the moonlight. So,
and it looks like the kind of building you see in a movie.
Right, and that's interesting because the building was built to be a palace, not a castle with dungeons. And it's only because Americans don't remember history very well. 1800s, 1400s, 1300s, Americans can rarely tell the difference. If you're looking at buildings that are typical of those eras, they could not tell them apart. And places like the Ridges, buildings are used for movie sets, for historical things that are set hundreds of years before. So there's a common confusion about old buildings, asylums for the insane, the haunted, cursed, and damned, the stigma business, just the fact that it was vacant for a while. And I have a theory, too, that everything nowadays, people that grow up in the 90s or the last decade, you just automatically assume that everything is or could be haunted. If they say it's haunted, it probably is. And that anywhere you go, you might find a bunch of disembodied ghosts and spooks kind of haunting around. And the reason they think that is because when you turn on the cable TV, you see just haunted this, haunted that. spooky this, spooky that, and you can't get away from haunted stuff on cable TV, even though some of it's clearly preposterous.
This is
And
true.
some of it's completely just made to get people to watch, to sell sponsors, to sell advertising time. I have a theory that what happened back in the 1990s was that cable TV expanded from about a dozen channels, one of which was Access TV at the time. It went from maybe a dozen channels up to hundreds of channels in the space of just a few short years. There was deregulation of the industry, and instantly cable TV companies are capable of floating hundreds of programs. What are you going to do if you want to take advantage of this? If you're a television producer, you want to produce programs that will sell advertising, because that's the nature of the business. You're not educating people. You're selling advertising. So what they did was, in order to know which way to go with the new opportunity, you have focus groups of consumers. And the question is, what is just irresistible, will make people stop what they're doing, turn the channel, stand there and watch it? What kind of program will do that to you? And the answer turned out to be two things: paranormal and UFOs, which is a paranormal of a slightly different kind.
Right, a slightly different
An alien this, haunted that, ticket to sponsors. Sponsors will hurry up and buy your sponsorship, because everybody knows America's 10 most haunted places is going to get a big share of the viewers in the cable TV market. And that's all I think it is. So today, any place,
all these kids
every place
grew up with this.
Yes, haunted this, haunted that. It's all haunted. And back in my time, you know, if you really thought something was haunted, first of all, there were very few people that thought anywhere was really haunted. But if you did, people might give you kind of a wide berth. They might say, I don't know, she might be right. I don't really know. Or they might just think you a crank.
I remember the Munsters. Remember the Munsters?
Sure.
You
And
know,
the
there
Addams
was stuff in
Family.
the Addams Family.
I was an Addams Family fan myself.
Yeah, me too. And they kind of, I don't know, made fun of the whole idea.
Yeah.
But another thing that probably drew attention to Athens and to the Ridges was Billy Milligan. He was there at that time, and he was a national, you know, his story was a national obsession for a while.
At the time, yes, it was.
And for those of you who don't remember, he was from Lancaster, and he was, I don't know what to say, he was found guilty.
Actually, he was found innocent by reason of insanity.
Okay, found innocent by reason of insanity.
And the specific diagnosis was multiple personality, which was new at the time.
And there have been movies on this idea of multiple personality, and that all leads, I guess, back into this spooky, scary, you know, kind of thing in a way. But anyhow, he was at the Ridges, or at the Athens Mental Health Center, it was called at the time. And there were many magazine articles, and there were these same guys that were chasing ghosts were kind of interested in him because of the multiple personality. And there was a famous movie called Sybil that Sally Fields, I think, starred in that, you know, all this stuff was kind of boiling up at the time. And I think that maybe got attached a little bit, you know, to the Ridges.
Yeah, it lent credence and attention to the Ridges as a facility, as an old Gothic building with interesting stuff going on inside of it, no doubt.
And then there was the story of the poor soul who died there. And everybody who comes to Ohio University, I think, hears that story. And, you know, I don't know how or understand why that has gotten to be such a big famous story on campus. You know, that's kind of perplexes me a little bit.
Well, she laid down on a cement floor. She had folded her clothes and put them on the windowsill. She laid down on a cold cement floor and passed away, and her body wasn't found for over 2 months.
I see.
So you leave a stain of the body where it had been a brutally cold month of January.
And
that was one of the months she was up there, and the tissues broke down, and pretty soon the body is surrounded by body fluids and organic material, And when they picked her up, the part that had not been exposed to air or light was a stain compared to what's around it. So that's a true story, and it's in the papers of the time. And it's, I know a fellow who was one of the people who found the body, although they didn't just find it, they knew they were going to find something upstairs because of the smell. You finally got a warming trend in late January, and they could smell something upstairs. So this same fellow is a police officer, and he was party to the investigation. And he said that the night she disappeared, they had been doing duct and blower HVAC work in the attic. And a couple of doors were blocked open that normally are sealed shut. She was believed to be able to get up there and hide from people then who were searching for her. Whether she was trapped up there, well, she was trapped up there, but whether she chose not to try and attempt to get out or attract attention to herself is unclear. What's clear from the investigation is that there were no second or third people involved. There was no molestation or assault or any other people involved up there but her. She did what she did solely on her own. And that's why I got to deal with a certain amount of scuttlebutt, you might say, in the community. There are people who want to believe that she was lured up there to have sex for money or cigarettes or whatever, and killed by somebody who had lured her up there, be they staff or other patients, and that's just baloney. Nobody that ever knew that woman agrees that that's possible at all. But it makes a better story.
Well, yeah, for
people
sure.
say, well, you know what I heard? I heard she was lured up there. Well, that makes a more lurid
just the
story.
word.
Yeah,
lure.
No, that doesn't seem to be the case.
And so, as a result of that, then, generations of OU students have dared each other to go up there, especially when it was empty back in the 90s.
They can't get up there. Nobody can get up there anymore unless the OU maintenance people let them.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
It's an attractive nuisance. If you let everybody go up there, they'd be building fires up in the attic, and
they might be luring people up there then.
Yeah, it would be a mess. And but what I would like to propose is that Ohio University take that stain and cut out the floor portion, stand it up in the lobby of the Kennedy. Have oral histories on broadcast, newspapers from the era, and make it transparent and accountable, and not just let it be a mystery stain that may or may not be there. But of course, there's plenty of pictures of it. And people want to break in, and OU denies that there is such a thing, or that anybody would ever want to see it, or that it will go away someday, or whatever. I think
I don't think.
I've talked to OU officials who are flummoxed.
Yeah.
They are bamboozled. They do not know what to do. They giggle inappropriately and start looking away from you, won't make eye contact anymore, and change the subject. They just they have no clue what to do about this stain.
And that's too bad, because it's too bad it all happened in the first place. It's a terrible story of a sad situation. And then for it to get turned around and turned into some kind of a crazy, story about all this other stuff. But we're human. This is what people do, so I guess. But I wanted to say one more thing about you, George, and that is that you do tours of the Ridges. How often do you do your tours?
Well, I do tours under two circumstances. I do tours as part of my present job as volunteer coordinator for the Appalachian Behavioral Healthcare. I'm the volunteer program administrator by job title, and in the past I've been the coordinator for all student and volunteer programs. So there are times when I will arrange a tour of the Ridges for psychology or social work classes, and student nurses that do their clinicals at ABH. In fact, earlier today I was up there with a group of nursing students from the University of West Virginia at Parkersburg.
Oh, neat.
There aren't that many psych facilities around. that nursing students can do their clinicals. So we host them at ABH, and I take people like that on tours as part of my job. Working with the Historical Society on Saturday afternoons and special events is also part of the tour business.
So that's the Athens Historical Society on Court Street.
Right, the Athens Historical Society and Museum.
So if a person were interested, genuinely interested, in taking a tour of, just to see the ridges and to understand, because I imagine there's many people that live right here in Athens that have never even gone up there or seen the ridges. How would they get a spot on your tour?
They would call the Athens County Historical Society and Museum and tell them they want to be on the next tour. And they put your name down. When the tour time arrives, remember, it's all outside. There is no inside component. We have requested and proposed a very circumscribed interior route because I know every doorway, hallway. I should mention that early on in working there, I was asked to be a tour guide for potential investors. And when those potential investors got back in their cars, laughed, and drove away, I still had the keys. And me and the other fellows I worked with doing this could explore the basements and the attics and the cottages and the sheds and outbuildings and everywhere. We went everywhere that those keys would get us.
That sounds like fun.
To this day, there's only one place that I can't say that I'm completely familiar with, and that's the subcellar beneath the basement of the main building. But I have been down there with maintenance guys, and there's nothing there except stone walls and blocks of cement, building materials that were thrown down there and never rounded up, retrieved, or cleaned up. It was all that's down there, plus steam pipes running through.
I say because I'm a little bit claustrophobic. I don't like the sounds. So let's put our pictures back up again of the buildings on the ridges, and maybe just quickly you can tell us what some of these buildings are.
Well, that's the main administration building. That's the old front door from way back. The porch was put on several years after the building itself was built and opened. And if you walk around on the porch, you can see where the porch, the structural elements of the porch block stone arches, and it's like you can tell that the building wasn't designed for that porch to be there, but they put it on eventually.
And what was that originally?
That's just a porch, just like it is today.
And so the building itself was at the center. We talked about the Kirkbride buildings where there was a center.
That's the heart, the central heart of the Kirkbride part of the building.
Okay, so, and that you would say was how old?
Well, the Kirkbride opened for business in 1874.
Okay.
It was commissioned by the Ohio State Legislature in 1868. About 6 years later, they had enough of it built to move in, and those were the Kirkbride wings. What you're looking at right now is a Kirkbride wing that goes out to the west of the main building. And that's the area that was never renovated. The wings west of the main building were never renovated, and those are the ones we abandoned back in the 80s. The wings on the other side, the east wings of the building, those are ones that were renovated by mental health in the 70s or 80s, and the wiring and the plumbing is relatively recent.
And that's where OU has some offices up there now.
OU has offices, storage space, fine arts studios, and other things. The picture you're looking at right now is Cottage O, and it's one of the cottages, it's a remnant of the cottage era. It would have been built around 1910, roughly.
It's a lovely building.
It is a lovely building. It now houses part of the Voinovich Center.
I've been to a couple events there, and it's amazing how it's well kept and, you know, it's in good shape.
Well, it wasn't for a long time. I remember after they abandoned that building, it was beat up, and the porch roof is falling down, and windows are smashed out, partly boarded, partly open.
Boy, they've sure brought it back.
Yes, they have. They brought back old Cottage O, old Cottage R. Both of those buildings are part of the Voinovich Center. I think Cottage R houses the Institute for Local Government and Rural Development. Up on the hill, the Conacher building former Cottage L. That was so far gone. The first time I walked in the one of the two obvious front doors of that building, you could see the pieces of the sky here and there.
Oh my gosh.
Through big holes in the immediate ceiling, smaller holes in the higher ceiling, and finally in the roof. There were places you could see the sky through there. And it's exquisitely well preserved now and renovated. That's the extreme western edge of the old Kirkbride building. Mm-hmm. That's the, out back it's the male dining hall. There were two octagonal buildings out back. On the east side is the male dining hall, on the west side the female dining hall. When I was there, and they were had not quite abandoned all use of those buildings, the one on the eastern side was the chapel, and the one on the western side was what we call the old rec center. Somebody got some money one year, some consultant fixed it up. There was it was called the Gates of Granada. They had, this
what a name.
Kind of bizarre. It's like a real poorly done, dorky high school prom. They had old Spanish flaming sconces and crossed swords on the wall and this kind of stuff. But they had skee ball and shuffleboard and stuff like that inside of there.
Well, that's nice. What are we looking at here?
That is Faulkner Hall, and it's the only major cottage that hasn't been remodeled by OU. And they say that's because, well, it's obviously because they just haven't got around to it yet. It's a small, tight building ought to make an excellent rehab prospect.
Now, behind that, there's some kind of research facility.
Right, that's the
there?
Conacher Research Facility. And behind and above that used to be the TB hospital.
Oh, so they tore that down and built the research facilities, kind of?
No, they tore it down, but the spot is still vacant.
Oh.
Nothing has been built. The Cottage L, where the Conacher Research Facilities are, that's as old or older than the TB hospital was. That what you're looking at now is the auditorium, which is one of the very first buildings renovated by OU.
That's lovely.
Yes,
Grecian
it is. And
columns and all.
You can have wedding receptions and proms and, small-size theater performances and a lot of other things in that auditorium. It's very well taken care of. And earlier this summer, we had a big Ridges conference. Experts in architecture and history get together for a whole day of exploring the Athens Asylum grounds.
Cool, cool.
And so it is still often used and accessible to the community.
Excellent. Well, I can't tell you how I appreciate you coming here and talking about this, because I think that our purpose was to kind of debunk the idea that it's some kind of a spooky, wooky, crazy place. But I think in the process, maybe we did that a little bit, but we also touched on so much history and so much information about the Ridges that I just feel like I have a whole different feeling about it now.
Well, good.
I really do. And if you've never driven up there, go up, drive around. There's nothing to stop you. There's no reason why you can't go up there and drive around. I got kind of familiar with it when they had the old auctions. Remember that? They had the auctions out of the back of one of the buildings down by the power plant. So I kind of got up there then, and I was fascinated with it. So thanks a million, George, for being here. I appreciate it.
Glad to have a chance to talk truth about the Ridges.
There you go.
And get away from the spooky crap, which I don't believe in. And I think it's unfair and makes it difficult for people struggling with mental illness to get the understanding and acceptance that we all wish they would have.
That's right. That's right. So from now on, people, when anybody says the Ridges, what we want you to say is, it's a wonderful, historic part of Athens. And thanks for being here with us. And I won't say happy Halloween because you're going to be seeing this after Halloween, but I hope your Halloween was a good one. Bye.